The text came in while I was standing under the buzzing fluorescent lights of a grocery store staring at a display of discounted poinsettias that were already starting to wilt. Do not come to Christmas dinner this year. It will be better for everyone. No greeting, no explanation, just that sentence sitting on my phone like a closed door slammed in my face. For a moment, I honestly thought it was meant for someone else. I reread it slowly, my thumb hovering over the cracked screen. The store's holiday playlist hummed in the background, something cheerful and hollow about homecoming and snow. A cashier laughed at something a customer said. Somewhere down the aisle, a child begged for candy. Life kept moving like nothing had happened. But something had. I was 32 years old, and my mother had just uninvited me from Christmas. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, but I didn't cry. Crying was something I'd learned to do quietly later behind locked doors. Instead, I stood there gripping the handle of my cart, my breath shallow, my chest tight in that familiar way that told me this wasn't just about dinner. This was about erasing me. I typed back one word. Why? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then another message arrived. Your brother is hosting this year. He says it would be awkward if you came. You know how sensitive he is. Please don't make this difficult. My brother, Evan. Golden child Evan. The one whose feelings were always treated like fine china while mine were apparently disposable paper plates. I locked my phone and pushed the cart forward, abandoning the poinsettias, abandoning the cart entirely near the checkout. I walked out into the cold Midwestern air with nothing but my coat and a hollow feeling blooming in my chest. Outside, snow fell in soft, lazy flakes. The kind of snow people post pictures of with captions about magic and blessings. It landed on my hair, melted against my cheeks, slid down my scarf. I barely felt it. At 32, I thought I understood my family's dynamics. I had spent my entire adult life learning how to stay useful enough to be tolerated. I paid for birthdays that weren't mine. I hosted Thanksgivings that no one thanked me for. I showed up early, stayed late, cleaned quietly, and smiled through comments that were never quite jokes. But this felt different. This felt final. I drove home in silence, the wipers pushing aside snow that kept coming no matter how fast they moved. My apartment, a modest one-bedroom I'd rented for years, greeted me with its usual stillness. No decorations, no tree, just clean lines, neutral colors, and the smell of lemon cleaner. I dropped my keys on the counter and sat down at the small kitchen table, staring at the wall, like it might explain something if I waited long enough. I wasn't a bad daughter. That was the thought that kept repeating. I worked hard. I didn't ask for money. I never embarrassed them. I'd built a respectable career as a compliance analyst for a regional insurance firm, the kind of job no one fully understands but everyone assumes is stable. I paid my bills. I sent cards. I called when I was supposed to. And yet here I was, excluded again. My family had a way of rewriting history that always left me standing alone with my confusion. My parents, Harold and Denise Carter, were the kind of people who valued appearance above all else. My father, retired now, had spent decades in upper management and never stopped managing. My mother curated her life the way some women curate Instagram feeds, matching outfits, smiling photos, carefully controlled narratives. And then there was Evan, 2 years younger than me. Charismatic, restless, brilliant in short bursts and disastrous over long stretches. The kind of man people forgave automatically because he smiled at the right moments and spoke with confidence. Growing up, I learned early that Evan's mistakes were temporary while mine were defining. When he dropped out of college, it was because he was finding himself. When I switched majors once, it was framed as instability. When he maxed out his credit cards, my parents called it youthful ambition. When I hesitated to co-sign a loan years later, I was selfish. Family helps family, my mother used to say. What she meant was I helped clean up Evan's messes. I stood up and walked to the bookshelf in my living room, my eyes landing on a small wooden box tucked between old novels and binders. It was dark walnut carved with a simple leaf pattern, the edges worn smooth by time. My grandmother's box. Grandma Ruth had given it to me when I was 16, pressing it into my hands like it was something fragile. Keep your important things here, she'd said. The ones no one else needs to see. She had been my refuge growing up. The only adult who noticed when I went quiet, who listened without correcting me, who believed me without asking for proof. She died 3 years ago, and with her went the last person in my family who treated me like I mattered simply because I existed. I hadn't opened the box in months. That night I did. Inside were old photographs, letters tied with faded ribbon, and at the bottom an envelope I didn't recognize. Thick paper, yellowed edges, my name written across the front in my grandmother's careful script. For Marissa, when you need the truth. My heart began to pound. I sat down slowly, the envelope trembling between my fingers. The room felt suddenly too quiet, like it was holding its breath with me. I slid a finger under the flap and opened it. Inside was a single document, a copy of a will. Ruth Carter's last will and testament. My eyes skimmed over the legal language, the dates written out in full, the formal tone that felt strange paired with my grandmother's handwriting. And then I saw it. One line nestled between paragraphs, like it had always belonged there. I bequeath my residential property located on Lake Briarwood to my granddaughter Marissa Carter as sole beneficiary. I stopped breathing. Lake Briarwood. The house everyone said had been left to Evan. The house my parents claimed my grandmother had wanted him to have because he needed it more. The house Evan had moved into less than 6 months after her funeral. My hands went cold. I read the line again, slower this time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less impossible. They didn't. My grandmother had left the lake house to me. Not Evan, not both of us, me. A low, sick realization settled into my stomach. Someone had lied. And as I sat there alone in my apartment, snow falling quietly outside, phone still dark on the counter where my mother's message waited unanswered, I understood something with terrifying clarity. They hadn't just uninvited me from Christmas. They had been hiding me from the truth. And if this document was real, then everything I thought I knew about my family was about to collapse. I folded the will carefully and placed it back in the envelope, my pulse steady now in a way that felt unfamiliar. Calm didn't mean safe. Calm meant resolve. For the first time in my life, I wasn't wondering what I had done wrong. I was wondering how far they had gone to keep me small. And I knew deep down that whatever came next, there was no going back to being quiet. Not anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my couch with the envelope resting on my chest, like it weighed 100 pounds, staring at the ceiling while memories replayed themselves in a new, uglier light. Every conversation, every half answer, every time I'd been told not to ask questions. By dawn, exhaustion had sharpened into clarity. If my grandmother had left the lake house to me, then someone had actively chosen to hide that truth. Not forget it, not misunderstand it, hide it. I made coffee I didn't drink and sat at the kitchen table as the winter sky lightened outside my window. Snow clung to the fire escapes and rooftops, softening the city, disguising the edges. My family had always been good at disguises. I took out my phone and scrolled through old photos. Christmases past, Thanksgiving dinners. Evan standing in front of the lake house last summer, beer in hand, arm around our mother, the caption reading, "Blessed to be home." Home. I zoomed in on the photo, my jaw tightening. I had helped repaint that house every summer from the time I was 14. I had scrubbed floors, hauled furniture, replaced rotting boards on the dock alongside my grandmother, while Evan was busy or traveling or figuring things out. That house wasn't just property. It was memory. It was work. It was the only place I'd ever felt fully seen. And now it had been taken from me with a smile. By mid-morning, I was dressed and out the door, the envelope tucked securely into my bag. I didn't know exactly where I was going, yet only that sitting still wasn't an option anymore. My first stop was my parents' house. I hadn't planned it that way. My hands turned the steering wheel almost on their own. Muscle memory. Conditioning. A lifetime of driving toward them whenever something felt wrong. The house looked exactly the same as it always had. Brick exterior, perfectly trimmed hedges, a wreath on the door that coordinated with the one on the garage. Everything neat, everything controlled. I sat in my car for a long moment before getting out. When my mother opened the door, her smile was automatic, practiced. It faltered when she saw my face. "Marissa, what are you doing here?" I didn't return the smile. I stepped inside without waiting to be invited, shrugging off my coat. The house smelled like pine cleaner and cinnamon, artificial warmth layered over something cold. "We need to talk," I said. Her mouth tightened. "About Christmas, about Grandma's will." The color drained from her face so quickly it was almost impressive. She recovered just as fast. "I don't know what you think you found," she said carefully, "but everything was handled properly. Your grandmother's estate was settled years ago." I reached into my bag and placed the envelope on the entryway table. Then why does her will say the lake house is mine? The silence that followed was loud. My father appeared in the doorway to the living room, his expression already defensive. What's going on? Denise glanced at him, a flicker of something passing between them. Fear, calculation. Where did you get that? She asked. From Grandma, I said. The same place she kept everything important. My father picked up the envelope, scanned the document, his jaw tightening with each line. He set it down slowly. That's an old draft, he said. She changed it. When? Before she passed. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because Denise snapped, it would have caused unnecessary conflict. I laughed, a sharp sound that surprised even me. Unnecessary for who? She crossed her arms. Evan needed stability. You were doing fine. We made a decision as a family. You made a decision without me. My father sighed, rubbing his temples. You always make things harder than they need to be. There it was. The familiar script. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. This isn't about making things hard. This is about you lying to me. For years. Denise's eyes hardened. You're being dramatic. I straightened. No, I'm being informed. I turned and walked out before they could say anything else. My legs shook as I reached my car, but my hands were steady as I closed the door. They knew. Every word, every deflection confirmed it. They had chosen Evan, again. I drove away without looking back. That afternoon, I called the county records office. It took 3 transfers and a long hold, but eventually a bored-sounding clerk answered my questions. Ownership transfers. Executor filings. Dates spoken out loud like they meant nothing. The lake house had been transferred 6 months after my grandmother's death. Executor Denise Carter. Beneficiary Evan Carter. My grip tightened on the phone. Was there a copy of the signed will on file, I asked? Yes, the clerk said. The version used for the transfer. Could I request a copy? There was a pause. Sure, I'll email it. When it arrived, my stomach dropped. The signature looked like my grandmother's name. But it wasn't hers. I had seen her handwriting my entire life. Birthday cards, notes slipped into my bag, labels on jars in her pantry. Her capital R always looped back slightly at the top. This one didn't. I sat there staring at the screen, my heart pounding, something dark and steady settling into place. They hadn't just hidden the truth. They had forged it. By evening, I was sitting across from my friend Allison at a quiet diner, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that never tasted quite right. She'd known me since college. She knew my family well enough to see what others didn't. She read the document slowly, her face growing more serious by the second. This is fraud, Marissa. I know. You need a lawyer. The word landed heavy. I wasn't someone who sued. I avoided confrontation. I apologized when other people bumped into me. The idea of taking my family to court felt surreal, but so did being erased. I don't want revenge, I said quietly. Allison met my eyes. Wanting the truth isn't revenge. On my drive home, the city lights blurred through my windshield. I thought about every Christmas I'd spent trying to earn my place. Every birthday Evan forgot. Every time my parents asked me to be patient, to be understanding, to be the bigger person. All of it had led here. When I got home, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. Let's not blow this out of proportion. We can talk after the holidays. I stared at the screen. For years I had waited, swallowed things, let moments pass. Not this time. I typed back one sentence. I'm done pretending this didn't happen. Then I turned my phone off. As I stood by my window watching snow fall over a city that suddenly felt different, I understood something that scared and steadied me all at once. They thought they could exclude me quietly. They thought I would accept it the way I always had. They were wrong, and whatever came next wouldn't be quiet at all. The first lawyer I called didn't believe me. She listened politely, asked a few surface questions, then said in a tone that felt almost rehearsed. Family disputes over inheritance are complicated. Often emotions distort memory. I suggest mediation. Mediation. The word made my jaw clench. I thanked her, hung up, and sat there staring at my reflection in the dark laptop screen. For a brief, ugly moment, doubt crept in. The kind my family had planted in me since childhood. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Grandma had changed her mind. Maybe I was overreacting. That doubt lasted exactly 3 minutes. Then I opened the scanned will again. I looked at the signature. I compared it to the birthday card from my 21st birthday that I'd kept folded inside Grandma's wooden box. The loop was missing. Grandma Ruth never missed the loop. I called another lawyer, then another. The fourth one didn't interrupt me. Her name was Caroline Bishop. Her voice was calm, low, unhurried. She let silence do its work. When I finished explaining, she said I need to see the documents. I emailed everything while she stayed on the line. There was a long pause. "This is serious," she said finally. "If what you're saying is accurate, this isn't a family misunderstanding. This is inheritance fraud." The word landed in my chest like a dropped plate. Fraud. "Can it be fixed?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "But it won't be clean and it won't be quiet." I thought about Christmas. About the text telling me not to come. About Evan sitting by the fireplace in a house that wasn't his, laughing like nothing in the world could touch him. "I'm not looking for quiet anymore," I said. That afternoon, I started digging. Not emotionally, practically. I requested bank records. I pulled old emails. I combed through years of messages from my parents, noticing patterns I'd ignored before. The way my mother avoided specifics. The way my father shut down conversations with final-sounding phrases. "We handled it. Trust us. You're remembering it wrong." By nightfall, my head ached, but my hands kept moving. I found an email from 2 years ago sent by my mother to Evan. Subject line: Lake House paperwork. Just a few lines. Casual. Damning. "Everything's filed. Don't worry. Just let us handle it." My stomach twisted. They hadn't even tried very hard to hide it. They hadn't needed to. They were used to me not pushing. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Evan. "Why are you stirring things up?" I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Why are you living in a house that was left to me?" His response came almost immediately. "That's not true. Mom said Grandma changed it. You were always too busy to care about that place anyway." I laughed, out loud. I typed back. "Then why is her real will in my possession, and why doesn't the one you used match her handwriting?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No reply. That silence felt louder than any argument. By midday, Caroline called me back. "I've reviewed everything," she said. "We have enough to move forward. I'll file a formal claim to contest the transfer. Once that happens, your parents and brother will be notified." When I asked, "Within 10 days. 10 days. That meant after Christmas." I smiled grimly. They'd wanted a quiet holiday without me. Instead, they were going to get a reckoning. That evening, my mother called. I let it ring until it stopped. Then she called again and again. Finally, I answered. "Marissa," she said, her voice syrupy, forced. "We need to talk. This is getting out of hand." "Out of hand," I repeated. "Yes, Evan's very upset." I imagined him pacing the lake house, phone in hand, realizing for the first time that I wasn't backing down. "Good," I said. Her tone sharpened. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand exactly what I'm doing. I'm correcting a lie." Her breath hitched. "That document you found means nothing legally." "It will," I said, "very soon." There was a long silence. Then her voice dropped. "If you do this, you will tear this family apart." I leaned back against my kitchen counter, staring at the ceiling. "You already did," I said quietly. "You just didn't think I'd notice." I hung up before she could respond. That night, sleep still didn't come easily. But it wasn't because of anxiety anymore. It was because my mind kept replaying moments with new clarity. The Thanksgiving Evan had hosted at the lake house without inviting me. The time my mother told me Grandma would have wanted Evan to have something to anchor him. The way my father avoided eye contact whenever I mentioned the property. It all fit now. The next day, Caroline emailed me the draft filing. Seeing my name listed as claimant felt surreal. This was real. There was no turning back. On December 22nd, she called again. "I've submitted the preliminary claims," she said. "They'll be notified after the holidays." I looked at the small, undecorated tree I'd finally set up in my living room. White lights only. No ornaments. "Perfect," I said. That night, I scrolled through social media and found Evan's latest post. A photo of him in front of the fireplace at the lake house. Wine glass raised, smiling. Caption: "Grateful for family and new beginnings." My fingers hovered over the screen. For one reckless moment, I considered commenting, posting the will, exposing everything publicly. But I didn't. Not yet. Revenge didn't need to be loud to be devastating. It needed timing. I turned off my phone and sat in the quiet, the white lights of the tree reflecting softly off the walls. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for my family to change. I was preparing for them to be exposed. And the closer Christmas came, the more certain I became of one thing. They had underestimated me. And that was going to cost them everything. The days leading up to Christmas passed in a strange, suspended calm, like the quiet before a storm everyone pretends not to see on the horizon. On the surface, nothing had changed. I went to work. I answered emails. I smiled at coworkers who asked about my holiday plans. I said I was keeping things simple this year, which wasn't a lie. I just didn't say why. But underneath that calm, something inside me had shifted permanently. I wasn't bracing anymore. I wasn't rehearsing apologies or explanations. I wasn't trying to make myself smaller so other people could stay comfortable. That alone felt like a revolution. On Christmas Eve morning, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. "We're keeping things small tonight. Evan is hosting. I hope you can find peace and not hold on to grudges." I read it twice. Not an apology, not even a question. Just another attempt to control the narrative. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the email Carolyn had sent late the night before. The filing confirmation, official, stamped, real. Once served, the claim would be public record. There was no undoing that. I made myself breakfast I barely touched and sat at the table staring at the small wooden box that had started all of this. Grandma Ruth's box. The one thing no one had thought to take from me. Funny how people underestimate sentiment. By early afternoon, my father called. I let it ring. Then Evan. Then my mother again. I ignored them all. I had spent my entire life being available on demand, jumping whenever they snapped their fingers. Silence, I was learning, was its own kind of boundary. Around 4 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. "You think you're being clever. You're not." I didn't need a signature to know it was Evan. I typed back slowly, deliberately. "I'm not being clever, I'm being honest." The reply came instantly. "You're embarrassing yourself. You always do this. You play the victim." My hands didn't shake this time. I typed. "I didn't forge a will, you did." There was no response after that. As evening fell, snow began drifting down again, soft and relentless. The city looked like a postcard. Lights glowed in windows. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. Somewhere else, music played. Across the state, my family was gathering in a house built on a lie. I put on my coat and left my apartment. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. The drive to Lake Briarwood felt surreal, like I was moving through a memory instead of a place. The trees lining the road were heavy with snow branches bending under the weight. I'd traveled this road dozens of times growing up, usually with my grandmother humming softly in the passenger seat. When the lake finally came into view, my chest tightened. The house stood there, lit up and polished like it belonged in a magazine. New siding, new railing, new landscaping. Evan's touch everywhere. My grandmother's soul nowhere. I parked down the street far enough away to remain unseen and sat there with the engine off, watching through the falling snow. Through the window, I could see movement. Evan pacing with a drink in his hand. My mother adjusting candles. My father standing slightly apart, his shoulders stiff. They looked perfect. They always did. I took out my phone and snapped a single photo of the house glowing against the dark lake. Then I drove home. I didn't need to confront them in person. That wasn't where my power was. When I got back to my apartment, I sat down at my table, opened my laptop, and logged into the family group chat. The same one where I'd been told not to come. The last message sat there cold and dismissive. "Do not come to Christmas dinner this year." I uploaded the photo of the lake house. Then I attached a scanned copy of my grandmother's will. Then the county filing confirmation. At the bottom, I typed one sentence. "Merry Christmas. Grandma's handwriting is beautiful, isn't it?" My finger hovered over the send button. For a moment, I thought about the little girl I used to be, the one who tried so hard, the one who believed if she stayed good enough, quiet enough, she'd earn her place. Then I pressed send. The message appeared instantly. One by one, the red receipts popped up. Seen by Mom, seen by Dad, seen by Evan. No one replied. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding, but not with fear. With release. Minutes passed. Then my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call and another. Text poured in. "What is this? Delete that right now. You've gone too far. How could you do this on Christmas Eve?" I didn't answer a single one. For the first time, they were the ones scrambling, the ones trying to control damage, the ones afraid of exposure. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window watching snow blanket the city. Later that night, a private message came through from Evan. "You've ruined everything." I typed back. "No, I stopped lying for you." Then I turned my phone off completely. Outside, church bells rang somewhere in the distance, soft and hollow. Midnight was approaching. I rested my head back against the couch and closed my eyes. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. And I knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened next, the truth was finally moving, quietly, relentlessly. Christmas morning arrived without ceremony. No frantic phone calls, no forced smiles, no drive across state lines to perform happiness for people who resented my presence the moment I stopped being useful. I woke late sunlight filtering through my curtains, the city muffled under a fresh layer of snow. For a few seconds, I forgot everything. Then memory settled back in, not like a punch, but like a weight I had finally learned how to carry. My phone sat where I had left it, powered off on the kitchen counter. I didn't reach for it. I made coffee and stood by the window watching a man across the street help his elderly neighbor shovel her walkway. They laughed about something, breath fogging the cold air. The normalcy of it made my chest ache in a quiet way. This was what family was supposed to look like: showing up, not stealing, not gaslighting, not rewriting reality to protect the most charming liar in the room. By mid-morning, curiosity got the better of me. I turned my phone back on. It vibrated immediately, lighting up with missed calls, voicemails, and messages stacked on top of each other like accusations. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I didn't need to hear the tremble in my mother's voice or the forced calm in my father's. I scrolled instead. Extended family members had entered the conversation now. An aunt asking if everything was okay. A cousin saying she didn't know who to believe. An uncle suggesting we handle this privately. Privately. That word again. I set the phone down. Privately was how lies survived. Around noon, my father called again. I stared at his name on the screen for a long moment before answering. "Marissa," he said, his voice low, strained. "You didn't need to do this like that." "Like what I asked?" "Publicly." I almost laughed. "You mean where everyone can see the truth?" He sighed. "Your mother is beside herself. Evan is furious." "Good," I said. There was a pause. Then his tone shifted, sharper now. "You've humiliated us." "No," I said quietly. "I told the truth. There's a difference." "You don't understand the consequences of this." I leaned against the counter, the cool surface grounding me. "I understand exactly what the consequences are. I just decided I wasn't willing to be the only one paying them anymore." He didn't respond. For the first time in my life, my father had nothing prepared to say. We hung up without a goodbye. That afternoon, Caroline emailed me. "They've contacted an attorney. Expected. Don't engage directly. Let me handle all communication." I exhaled slowly. The machinery was moving now, quiet, impersonal, unstoppable. By evening, the silence broke again. A message from Evan. "You really want to do this? You want to burn everything down?" I stared at the screen, thinking about all the times I'd cleaned up his messes, the debts I'd quietly helped pay, the excuses I'd made for him to people who deserved better. I typed back, "You burned it down when you forged Grandma's name." His reply came seconds later. "You always hated me." That one hurt more than I expected. Not because it was true, but because it revealed how deeply he misunderstood me. "I didn't hate you," I wrote. "I believed you." There was no response after that. That night, I sat on my couch wrapped in a blanket, a glass of wine untouched on the table. Outside, the city glowed softly. Neighbors visiting neighbors, families gathering in warm rooms. For a moment, grief washed over me. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd never truly had. A family that told the truth. A brother who didn't need saving. Parents who didn't equate control with love. The next morning, December 26th, my phone rang at 8 sharp. Caroline. The county clerk confirmed receipt of the claim, she said. "Ownership transfer is under review. Also, there's something else." My stomach tightened. "What?" "There are discrepancies in the executor filings. Signatures that don't match previous records. The county fraud division may get involved." "Fraud division." I sat down slowly. "Does that mean criminal?" "Potentially," she said gently. "I know this is your family. I want to be clear about what this could lead to." I closed my eyes. "I never wanted anyone arrested," I said. "I know. But this isn't about what you want anymore. It's about what they did." After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. I thought about my mother, her obsession with appearances. About how far she'd gone to protect Evan's image. About the lie she'd chosen over her daughter. Choices had consequences. By afternoon, the fallout began in earnest. A message from a neighbor of my parents. Another from a friend of Evan's asking what was happening. Rumors spreading faster than facts ever had. My family's perfect image was cracking. That night, my mother left a voicemail I couldn't bring myself to delete. Her voice was shaky, angry, afraid. "How could you do this to me?" she said. "I gave you everything. You've always been ungrateful." I listened once, then I deleted it. That lie didn't get to live rent-free in my head anymore. Later, a message from my father came through. "We should have handled this differently." For the first time, it didn't sound like manipulation. It sounded like regret. I didn't reply. Not because I was cruel, but because I was done teaching grown adults lessons they refused to learn. As night fell, I stood by my window again, watching snow swirl under the streetlights. Somewhere across the state, my family was unraveling. Not because of me, but because the truth had finally arrived without asking permission. And as much as it scared me, as much as it hurt, there was one thing I knew for certain. I wasn't the quiet daughter anymore. I was the one who told the truth. And nothing was ever going to be the same again. The call from the County Fraud Division came 3 days later, just after 9 in the morning. I was standing in my kitchen rinsing a mug when my phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. I stared at it until it stopped buzzing, then rang again. This time I answered. Ms. Carter, a man asked, his voice neutral, professional. This is Investigator Lewis from the County Fraud Division. I'd like to speak with you regarding the estate of Ruth Carter. My stomach tightened, but my voice stayed steady. Yes. We've identified irregularities in the executor filings connected to the transfer of the Lake Briarwood property. We'll need your statement and copies of any documents in your possession. I leaned against the counter, the cool surface grounding me when, as soon as possible. After I hung up, the kitchen felt smaller, like the walls had moved in while I wasn't looking. This was no longer theoretical. No longer a family argument dressed up as misunderstanding. The system had taken notice, and the system didn't care about holiday timing or hurt feelings. It cared about facts. I called Caroline immediately. She answered on the first ring. I expected this, she said calmly after I explained. I'll be there with you. You don't need to worry about saying the right thing. Just tell the truth. The truth. For years, that word had felt dangerous, something that caused tension, something better softened or delayed. Now it felt like the only solid ground left. That afternoon, my mother showed up at my apartment. No warning, no call. I heard the knock and froze. It wasn't polite, it wasn't tentative, it was sharp, insistent. The kind of knock meant to assert authority. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding before opening the door. She looked smaller than I remembered, wrapped in her winter coat, makeup slightly smudged, eyes too bright. But the moment she saw me, her posture straightened, and the familiar steel slid back into place. How could you do this? She demanded, stepping inside without waiting to be invited. I closed the door behind her slowly. You don't get to talk to me like that, I said. Her mouth fell open. Excuse me? This, I continued, my voice surprisingly calm, is exactly why this happened. You barge in, you accuse, you never ask. She scoffed. I am your mother. And I am your daughter, I said, not your cover story. Her face flushed. You've always been difficult. I laughed softly. No, I've always been honest. You just didn't like what it revealed. She dropped her purse onto the table with a thud. Do you have any idea what you've started? People are talking. Neighbors, relatives, Evan's friends. Good, I said. They should. Her voice rose. You're putting your brother at risk. No, I said. He put himself at risk when he agreed to live in a house he didn't own. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me. This isn't you, she said finally. You're not like this. I stepped closer, meeting her eyes. You're right. I'm not the version of me you trained. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Fear, maybe, or realization. Then it hardened. You'll regret this, she said. I opened the door. You should go. She hesitated, clearly unused to being dismissed. Then she grabbed her purse and walked out without another word. I locked the door and slid down against it, my breath shaky. It hurt, but it also felt like ripping off a bandage that had been infected for years. The meeting with the investigator happened 2 days later in a plain office that smelled faintly of old coffee and printer toner. Caroline sat beside me, her presence steady and reassuring. Investigator Lewis asked questions carefully, methodically. Dates, conversations, handwriting samples. When he showed me the forged signature on the transfer document next to my grandmother's real one, my chest tightened. Do you recognize this? He asked. Yes, I said, the real one and the fake. He nodded. You're certain? I am, I said. I grew up watching her write. He made a note. When the meeting ended, he stood and offered his hand. Thank you for your cooperation. We'll be contacting the other parties involved. Other parties. My mother, my brother. As we walked out, Caroline touched my arm. You did well. I didn't think it would feel like this, I admitted. She gave a small, knowing smile. Justice rarely feels clean. It just feels necessary. That evening, Evan called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. What do you want? I asked. His voice was tight, angry, but underneath it, I heard something else. Panic. They're asking questions, he said. About the house, about Mom. Yes, I said. You didn't have to go this far. I closed my eyes. You went far when you signed paperwork you knew wasn't right. Silence stretched between us. She told me it was handled, he said finally. She said you didn't care. My chest ached. You never asked me. I didn't think I had to, he snapped. Everything always works out for me. There it was. The truth he'd never said out loud. Not this time, I said quietly. He swore under his breath. What do you want, Marissa? I thought about that question long after the call ended. What did I want? I wanted my grandmother's name cleared. I wanted my reality acknowledged. I wanted to stop carrying the weight of everyone else's choices. I wanted my life back. That night, I sat at my table with Grandma Ruth's box open in front of me. I took out a letter I hadn't read in years. One she'd written shortly before she died. In her looping script, she'd written, "Don't let them convince you that keeping peace is the same as keeping yourself." I folded the letter carefully, my hands steady. Whatever came next, I wasn't backing down. The truth was no longer mine alone. It belonged to the light now, and light, once it finds a crack, never stops spreading. The lake house was emptier than I expected. When Caroline confirmed that I was legally allowed to enter the property pending the review, I waited 2 full days before going. I told myself it was for practical reasons, scheduling, preparation. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid of what it would feel like to stand inside a place that had been stolen from me while everyone pretended it hadn't been. The drive out to Lake Briarwood was quiet. Snow had melted into slush along the roads, the trees bare and dark against a gray sky. I rolled down the window slightly as I crossed the last curve before the water came into view. The lake looked the same, wide, cold, honest. The house sat at the edge like it always had, but something about it felt wrong now. The porch lights were off, no cars in the driveway, no music drifting from inside. Evan had left. I parked and sat there for a long moment, my hands resting on the steering wheel, my heartbeat loud in my ears. This was mine. Not in theory, not on paper alone. Mine. I unlocked the front door with the spare key Caroline had advised me to retrieve from the lockbox Evan had installed. The door swung open easily, almost too easily, like it had been waiting. The air inside smelled different, not like Grandma Ruth's house. She had always kept the windows cracked, even in winter, letting the place breathe. She baked, she cooked, she lived in her space. Evan had replaced that with candles. Artificial scents layered over stale air. I stepped inside slowly. The furniture had changed. Modern, minimal, impersonal. Photos of Evan and his friends lined the mantel where Grandma's clock used to sit. The old quilt she'd kept folded over the back of the couch was gone. I walked from room to room, each step heavier than the last. The kitchen counters were cleared of clutter, but I could still see the faint outline where Grandma used to keep her ceramic jar of wooden spoons. The study had been turned into a home office, the shelves stripped bare. Only one thing remained untouched: the small built-in bookshelf by the window. I crouched down, running my fingers along the bottom shelf. There, tucked behind a row of Evan's business books, was a thin folder. My breath caught. Inside were documents, old property records, handwritten notes, and a letter, addressed to me. I sat on the floor and opened it. Marissa, if you are reading this, then something has gone wrong. I hope I am wrong, but I know my daughter. I know how fear makes her hold too tight. The house is yours because you see it, not because you need it. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Love, Grandma. My vision blurred. She knew. She had known exactly who she was trusting and exactly who might betray that trust. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into my bag. That was when I heard footsteps. I stood slowly as Evan appeared in the doorway. He looked exhausted, unshaven, eyes ringed with dark circles. For the first time in my life, he didn't look untouchable. You shouldn't be here, he said. I own the house, I replied, so yes, I should. He scoffed weakly. You always loved technicalities. I met his gaze. You always loved shortcuts. We stood there in silence, the weight of years pressing down between us. She told me it was temporary, he said finally. She said it would all sort itself out. Did you ask to see the will, I asked? He didn't answer. Did you ever once wonder why I wasn't invited here, I pressed. His jaw tightened. You don't understand what it's like to have everyone expect you to fail. I let out a slow breath. You don't understand what it's like to hold everything together so someone else never has to. He looked away. I didn't think it would come to this, he muttered. No, I said softly. You thought I'd stay quiet. He laughed bitterly. You were always good at that. I walked past him, opening the door. I'm not here to argue, I said. I'm here to take back what was taken. What happens to me, he asked. I paused. For once I said that's not my responsibility. I left him standing there, the sound of the door closing behind me echoing louder than it should have. That night, my mother sent an email. Long, emotional, carefully written. She spoke about intentions, about protecting the family, about how everything she did was out of love. She didn't apologize. She never once used the word lie. I forwarded it to Caroline. Let the record speak for itself. The next morning, Caroline called. They're requesting mediation, she said. They want to settle quietly. I smiled grimly. Of course they do. Do you want to hear their offer? Yes. They'll return the house formally. In exchange, they want you to withdraw your statement and agree not to pursue further action. I stared out the window at the gray sky. They want me to lie, I said. They want you to disappear, she corrected gently. I thought of Grandma's letter, of the bookshelf, of the silence I'd lived in for so long. No, I said, I want the truth on record. Caroline exhaled. Then this will go to court. Good, I said, let it. That afternoon, my father called for the first time since everything had unraveled. Your mother is scared, he said quietly. So was Grandma, I replied. And no one protected her. Silence. We raised you better than this, he said. I laughed softly. You raised me to tell the truth. I'm just finally doing it where you can hear. When the call ended, I felt something loosen inside me. Not anger, not victory. Release. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. That night, I slept at the lake house. I brought my own sheets, my own pillow. I opened the windows despite the cold and let the place breathe again. As I lay there listening to the water lap softly against the shore, I understood something with startling clarity. Revenge wasn't what I was after. Restoration was, and I was finally close enough to touch it. Court didn't look the way I expected. There were no dramatic gasps, no shouting, no moments that felt like something out of television. It was quieter than that, heavier, like a room built to absorb emotion rather than display it. The hearing was scheduled for mid-January, after the holidays had been packed away, and everyone had returned to pretending life was normal. I arrived early, my coat folded neatly over my arm, my hands empty except for a thin folder Caroline had prepared. Across the aisle, my mother sat rigidly beside her attorney posture, perfect face, composed in the way she'd practiced for decades. Evan sat a few seats away, leg-bouncing, jaw-clenched eyes fixed on the floor. My father wasn't there. That absence said more than any speech could have. When the judge entered the room, stood, then settled again. Papers rustled, pens clicked, names were read aloud like they were nothing more than labels. When mine was spoken, I felt it in my chest. Marissa Carter. Not daughter, not problem, not difficult one. Claimant. Caroline did most of the talking. She presented the will, the handwriting analysis, the county filing irregularities. The letter from my grandmother authenticated and dated. Each piece laid out carefully, methodically, like bricks forming an undeniable wall. My mother's attorney argued intent, confusion, emotional distress, family dynamics. The judge listened without expression. When it was my turn to speak, Caroline leaned over and whispered, "Only if you want to." I stood anyway. My voice didn't shake. For most of my life, I said I believed that keeping peace meant staying silent. I believed that love required compliance. When my grandmother left me that house, she wasn't giving me property. She was giving me proof. Proof that someone saw me clearly, that someone trusted me. I glanced briefly toward my mother, then back to the judge. I didn't bring this forward to punish my family. I brought it forward because the truth was buried, and I refused to stay buried with it. The room was silent. When the judge finally spoke, her voice was calm, measured. The court finds sufficient evidence to confirm the authenticity of the original will and significant discrepancies in the subsequent filing, she said. The property at Lake Briarwood is to be restored to the claimant pending final resolution. Further investigation into executor conduct will continue. My mother's face cracked for the first time. Not tears, something closer to shock. The gavel came down. Just like that, it was done. Outside the courthouse, cold air hit my lungs hard and clean. Caroline shook my hand, her grip firm. "This is only the beginning," she said. "But you did well." "I just told the truth," I replied. "That's harder than it sounds," she said gently. Evan approached me in the parking lot. Up close, he looked smaller, older, like someone who had finally run out of momentum. "She never meant for it to get this far," he said. I met his eyes. "That's what happens when lies go unanswered." He swallowed. "What happens now?" I considered him for a moment. The boy I'd grown up protecting. The man who'd learned to take without asking. "You figure out who you are without someone covering for you," I said. "That's what happens. I walked away before he could respond. The following weeks were a blur of paperwork inspections and quiet conversations with Caroline. The house was officially returned to me. The fraud investigation moved forward without my involvement beyond documentation. I didn't ask for updates. Some things didn't need to be watched to have impact. I focused instead on the lake house itself. I removed the artificial candles, donated the furniture Evan had chosen, opened every window even in the cold, letting winter air sweep through rooms that had been suffocating under pretense. In the study, I rehung Grandma's old clock. It still worked, ticking softly, steady, and patient. Time, it seemed, had never been on my family's side, only the truths. One afternoon, while sorting through boxes in the attic, I found something unexpected. A stack of old journals. My grandmother's handwriting filled each page, looping and deliberate. She wrote about the lake, about raising a daughter who cared too much about what people thought, about a granddaughter who listened more than she spoke. She wrote, "Marissa sees the cracks. She always has. I hope one day she learns that seeing isn't a flaw, it's a responsibility." I closed the journal, tears blurring the words. That night, sitting by the fire, I received a text from an unknown number. "I'm sorry," it read. "I didn't know how to stop her." I didn't need to ask who it was. I typed back, "You could have told the truth." There was no reply. Weeks later, the official notice arrived. The county was pursuing charges related to falsified documents. My mother would not be able to serve as executor for any estate again. The family trust was under review. Consequences. Quiet, legal, permanent. I felt no joy reading it, only a deep, steady calm. By early spring, the lake began to thaw. Ice cracked softly each morning, the sound carrying across the water like a slow exhale. I stood on the dock one evening, watching the sun sink low, painting the surface gold. For the first time, the house behind me felt like a home instead of a battleground. I thought about the woman I'd been before all of this, the one who apologized automatically, who waited to be chosen, who believed exclusion was something she deserved. That woman was gone. Not hardened, not bitter, just awake. Revenge, I'd learned, wasn't about destruction. It was about refusing to carry someone else's shame. And standing there alone with the sound of water and wind, I understood that the most powerful payback wasn't taking something from them. It was taking myself back. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, the way real change always does. Thin blades of green pushing through thawing ground. Longer evenings, the sound of water moving again beneath the surface of the lake. I stayed at the house full-time by March. Not because I was hiding, but because I was rebuilding something I'd never truly had before. A place that reflected who I was when no one was watching. I worked remotely most days. My laptop set up near the bay window where Grandma used to sit with her tea. In the afternoons, I painted. Not walls yet, just small things. Window trim, the old bench near the dock, slow work that forced patience back into my hands. The phone stayed mostly quiet. My mother didn't call anymore. My father sent one short message in early March. "I hope you're well." I didn't reply. Silence, I'd learned, wasn't punishment. It was honesty without explanation. One evening, Caroline called with an update. "The county has formally filed," she said. "Your mother's attorney is negotiating terms, but the evidence is strong. This will follow her." I stared out at the lake, now rippling freely again. I didn't want it to ruin her life. Caroline paused. "You didn't ruin anything. You stopped protecting a lie." After we hung up, I sat with that truth longer than I expected. I had spent years cushioning other people from consequences, believing that made me kind, believing that made me necessary. All it had really done was make me convenient. The real shift came a week later on a Tuesday afternoon I hadn't expected to matter. I was in town buying paint when I ran into a woman from my childhood, Laura McKenna. We'd gone to school together. She lived near the lake, now raising 2 teenage daughters. She stared at me for a moment, before smiling cautiously. "Marissa, right?" I nodded. She hesitated, then said, "I saw what happened. About the house." I felt that old instinct rise, the one that prepared excuses, soft explanations. Instead, I said yes. She studied me for a second longer, then surprised me. "I'm glad you didn't let them get away with it." Something in my chest loosened. "Thank you," I said. "My mother went through something similar," she added quietly. "Different story. Same ending. Everyone told her to let it go. She never did. It ate at her. It ate at..." She glanced toward the parking lot, then back at me. "I wish she'd had your courage." I drove home with her words echoing in my head. Courage. I'd never thought of myself that way. That night, as the sky darkened, headlights appeared in the driveway. My stomach tightened instinctively. Then I saw who it was. Evan. He got out of the car, slowly, hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders hunched against the cold. He looked thinner than the last time I'd seen him. Less polished, less certain. I didn't rush to the door. I let him knock. When I opened it, he didn't speak right away. I needed to see it, he said finally. The house. I stepped aside. You can look. He walked in hesitantly, like someone entering a museum after hours. His eyes moved around the room, taking in the changes, the absence of his things, the return of Grandma's. You took down the shelves, he said. They weren't hers, I replied. He nodded slowly. I didn't know about the letter. I know. He swallowed. She always believed in you more. I met his gaze. She believed in honesty. We stood there, the fire crackling softly behind us. I lost my job, he said suddenly. I didn't respond right away. They let me go when everything came out, he continued. Said the publicity wasn't something they could ignore. I searched his face for blame, for accusation. I didn't find it. I don't know what to do now, he admitted. For years I would have jumped in, offered solutions, contacts, a plan. This time I didn't. You figure it out, I said gently, like the rest of us do. He nodded, eyes shining, and I could see it then. The first crack in the armor he'd worn his whole life. I'm sorry, he said, not just for the house, for everything. I believed him. But belief didn't mean repair. I accept your apology, I said. That doesn't mean things go back to the way they were. I know, he whispered. When he left, the house felt quieter, not emptier, just settled. A week later, I received a letter from my mother's attorney. It was formal, carefully worded. It acknowledged the ruling. It referenced the investigation. It requested on her behalf a private meeting. I folded the letter and placed it in Grandma's box. I didn't respond. Some conversations arrived too late to matter. By April, the lake had fully thawed. Mornings smelled like damp earth and pine. Birds returned to the trees. Life resumed without asking permission. One afternoon, while clearing out the shed, I found Grandma's old sign tucked behind gardening tools. Handmade pies, honor system. She'd used it every summer. I leaned it against the porch and laughed softly. That was her, trusting, direct, unafraid of being honest even when it cost her. That evening, sitting on the steps with the sign beside me, I understood something that surprised me. The revenge wasn't in the exposure. It wasn't in the court ruling. It wasn't even in watching my family's image crack. The real revenge was this: living openly in the space they'd tried to take, choosing truth without waiting for permission, breaking a pattern that had lasted generations. As the sun dipped low over the lake, painting the water amber, I felt something solid take root inside me. Not anger, not triumph, freedom. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was ready for it. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, tucked between a utility bill and a flyer for lawn services. No return address, my mother's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. The careful slant, the deliberate spacing. She wrote the way she lived, controlled and intentional, as if every word needed permission before it appeared. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the table and made coffee instead, watching steam rise while my mind replayed every version of her voice I'd known. Sharp when angry, sweet when manipulating, cold when she felt cornered. When I finally sat down and opened the envelope, the paper inside was thicker than usual. Expensive. Heavy. Marissa, I don't know how we ended up here. That was the first lie. She knew exactly how. She wrote about fear, about pressure, about doing what she believed was best for the family. She said she never intended to hurt me. She said Evan needed stability. She said she thought I was strong enough to handle disappointment. Strong enough? I stopped reading for a moment, the words echoing in my head. She didn't apologize for forging the will. She didn't apologize for lying. She apologized for how it made me feel. At the bottom she wrote, "Please meet me, just us, I need to explain." I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. For the first time, I wasn't tempted. A few weeks earlier, I would have jumped at the chance. A meeting, an explanation, closure. I'd spent my whole life chasing some version of understanding from her. Now the letter felt like something else. A last attempt to regain control. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked down to the dock and sat with my feet dangling over the water, watching ripples move outward with each small breeze. Grandma Ruth used to say that water told the truth eventually. You could disturb it, pollute it, freeze it over, but sooner or later it would move again. By mid-April, word had spread further than I expected. A woman from a local nonprofit reached out after reading about the case in a community legal bulletin. She asked if I'd be willing to speak privately about my experience, specifically about financial manipulation within families. I hesitated. I wasn't a public person. I'd spent years staying out of the spotlight, carefully maintaining a life that didn't invite questions. But something inside me stirred. I agreed to meet her. Her name was Claire Donovan. She was in her early 40s, calm and direct, with the kind of presence that didn't need to dominate a room to be felt. We met at a small cafe near the courthouse. I see cases like yours more often than people think, she said, after listening quietly to my story. Adult children exploited financially under the guise of love, inheritance manipulation, emotional pressure. I wrapped my hands around my mug. Why don't people talk about it? Because family abuse doesn't leave bruises, she replied. It leaves doubt. That hit harder than I expected. She asked if I'd consider sharing my story anonymously as part of a resource program they were developing. Not for publicity, for education. I told her I'd think about it. On the drive home, I thought about all the messages I'd received over the past months. From women I barely knew. From strangers who'd heard fragments of the story and recognized themselves in it. They weren't asking for revenge tips. They were asking how to survive it. That night, Evan called. I almost didn't answer, but something told me this call would be different. I found a job, he said without preamble. Not glamorous. Warehouse operations. Early mornings. That's good, I replied. There was a pause. I'm moving out of state, he continued. Starting over. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I wanted you to hear it from me, he said. Not through Mom. Thank you. He hesitated. I know I can't fix what I broke. No, I said gently. But you can stop breaking it. He exhaled a sound heavy with something like relief. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet reflecting on how strange growth looked when it finally arrived. Awkward, late, uneven, but real. By May, the investigation had reached its final stage. Caroline called one afternoon while I was repainting the porch railing. The county has finalized their decision, she said. Your mother will face civil penalties and a permanent bar from serving as executor. No criminal charges, but the record stands. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. And the house, I asked. Fully and permanently yours. When the call ended, I sat on the porch steps, paint-streaked hands resting on my knees. It was over. Not the pain, not the history, but the fight. A few days later, I made my decision. I agreed to work with Claire's nonprofit, not as a victim, not as a cautionary tale, as someone who'd learned how to stop being used. My first recorded interview was quiet. Just me and a microphone in a small office. No cameras, no audience. I spoke about silence, about favoritism, about how love becomes a weapon when it's conditional. When it was over, Claire looked at me and smiled. You know, she said, most people think revenge is about winning. I nodded. But what you did, she continued, was reclaim authorship. That's much rarer. That word stayed with me. Authorship. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to a script written by someone else. I was writing my own. One evening near the end of the month, as the sun dipped low and the lake reflected streaks of pink and gold, I sat on the dock with Grandma's letter beside me. I read it again slowly. Don't let them convince you that keeping peace is the same as keeping yourself. I folded it carefully and placed it back in the box. The past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer defined the ending. And as the water moved steadily beneath my feet, I realized something quietly powerful. The most devastating revenge wasn't taking something back. It was becoming someone they could no longer control. The first time I went back to my parents' neighborhood after everything, it wasn't intentional. I had driven into town to meet Claire for lunch, taken a wrong turn, and suddenly found myself on the familiar street lined with identical mailboxes and trimmed lawns. The kind of place where nothing ever looked out of order, even when it was rotting underneath. My parents' house sat at the end of the block unchanged. Same shutters, same flag by the porch, same carefully curated normalcy. I slowed without meaning to. For years, just driving past that house had filled me with tension, like I was bracing for impact. Now the feeling was different, distant, almost observational, like looking at a photograph from someone else's life. I didn't stop. I kept driving. That realization stayed with me all afternoon, humming under the surface of conversation like a quiet engine. When Claire asked if I was all right, I surprised myself by smiling. I think I finally am, I said. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. That's usually how it happens. Not with fireworks, with clarity. Clarity, it turned out, made some people uncomfortable. A week later, I received an email from my father. Subject line, we need to talk. Short, direct, no pleasantries. I read it once, then closed my laptop. By that point, I'd learned the difference between urgency and manipulation, between conversation and control. Still, something about the message tugged at me. Not guilt, curiosity. I replied the next morning. I'm willing to listen. Public place, limited time. His response came almost immediately. Agreed. We met at a cafe near the highway neutral territory. He arrived early, already seated, hands wrapped around a coffee he hadn't touched. He looked older, not just aged, but diminished. The confidence that used to fill every room he entered had been replaced with something quieter. He stood when he saw me, then sat back down unsure. Thank you for coming, he said. I nodded and took the seat across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hiss of the espresso machine filled the space between us. Dishes clinked. Life continued around us indifferent. Finally, he cleared his throat. Your mother isn't doing well. I took a slow breath. I'm sorry to hear that. He flinched slightly. That's it. I met his eyes. That's all I have. He looked down at his hands. She feels like she's lost everything. I thought about Grandma's handwriting, about forged signatures, about years of silence. She lost control, I said. That's not the same thing. His jaw tightened. She was trying to hold the family together. At my expense, I replied calmly. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. I should have stopped it. Yes, I said. You should have. The words hung there heavy and undeniable. I thought you'd forgive us, he admitted quietly. Eventually. I leaned back in my chair. Forgiveness isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. He looked up, then really looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time without the filter of expectation. You're different, he said. I almost laughed. No, I said, I'm finally myself. He swallowed. Your mother wants to apologize. That was new. When I asked, she doesn't know how, he said. She's never been good at it. I considered that. The years of deflection, the rewriting, the certainty that intention mattered more than impact. I don't need an apology, I said finally. I need accountability. He nodded slowly as if tasting the word. And if she can't give that, then we don't have a relationship, I said simply. His eyes glistened, but he didn't argue. When we stood to leave, he hesitated. I'm proud of you, he said. I just wish it hadn't come to this. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something unexpected. Not anger, not sadness, acceptance. It always was going to, I said. That night back at the lake house, I sat by the fire thinking about lineage, about what we inherit beyond property, patterns, silence, fear, and about what we choose to pass on instead. The nonprofit program Claire was building had officially launched under a new name, Clear Ledger. Workshops on financial boundaries, legal literacy for adult children, quiet rooms where people could tell their stories without being told to calm down or forgive faster. She asked if I'd consider speaking at the first closed session. I'm not a motivational speaker, I warned her. She smiled. Good, we don't need one. The session was held in a small community center. Folding chairs, neutral walls. A circle of women ranging in age from late 30s to well into their 60s. They listened without interrupting as I spoke. I talked about favoritism disguised as fragility, about how being labeled the strong one often meant being the exploited one, about how silence becomes a habit, then a prison. When I finished, no one clapped. Instead, a woman across from me spoke softly. I thought I was the only one. Something broke open in my chest. Afterward, as people filtered out, one woman stayed behind. Silver hair, sharp eyes. She held my hand gently. I waited 40 years to tell the truth, she said. Don't wait like I did. Driving home that night, the lake came into view, just as the moon rose over it, casting a silver path across the water. I pulled over and sat there for a moment, engine off, heart full. For the first time, my story wasn't just mine. It was a mirror, a warning, an invitation. A few days later, another letter arrived. This one from my mother. Shorter than the last, no stationery, plain paper. I was wrong. I don't expect forgiveness. But I see now what I refused to see before. I read it twice. Then I folded it and placed it in Grandma's box. Not because it fixed anything, but because it marked something important. She had finally stopped pretending. As summer approached, the lake warmed. The house filled with light and laughter when friends visited. I hosted my first gathering there in July. Nothing elaborate, just food, music, people who showed up without conditions. Standing on the porch as the sun set, I felt something settle into place. The story that began with exclusion had ended in expansion, but there was one final chapter yet to be written. Not in court, not in letters, but in the choice I would make next. Because freedom, I was learning, isn't just about breaking away. It's about deciding what you build in the space that's left. The morning I realized the story was truly over, it wasn't dramatic. There was no phone call, no letter, no sudden wave of emotion. I was standing in the kitchen, barefoot, sunlight spilling across the counter, flipping pancakes the way Grandma Ruth used to. Too much butter, uneven edges, a little smoke curling up from the pan. Perfect. The lake outside the window was calm, the surface broken only by the slow glide of a duck cutting across the water. The house felt warm in that lived-in way that couldn't be staged, a place that had stopped holding its breath. I ate alone at the table, not because I had no one, but because I finally enjoyed my own company. For most of my life, being alone had felt like punishment, proof that I'd failed some invisible test of worthiness. Now it felt like choice, space, room to hear my own thoughts without them being corrected or minimized. After breakfast, I carried my coffee down to the dock and sat with my feet dangling just above the water. The boards were warm from the sun. Somewhere behind me, the screen door creaked softly in the breeze. This was the life they said I didn't need. This was the life they decided I couldn't be trusted to have. And now it was mine. The court case had wrapped quietly weeks earlier. No headlines, no spectacle, just paperwork, signatures, and consequences that followed the people who had earned them. My mother had withdrawn from every social circle she once curated so carefully. My father had retreated into silence. Evan had moved away, starting over without the safety net he'd always assumed would be there. None of it brought me satisfaction. What brought me peace was knowing I hadn't saved them from themselves this time. I had saved me. Clear Ledger continued to grow in ways I hadn't expected. The workshops filled. The waiting list grew longer. Women showed up carrying stories they'd never told out loud. Stories about parents who treated them like resources. Siblings who were rewarded for recklessness. Families that confused control with care. I didn't give speeches. I listened. And when I did speak, it wasn't to inspire, it was to validate. To say you're not imagining it. To say what happened to you matters. To say you're allowed to choose yourself without being cruel. One afternoon after a session, Claire sat beside me on the steps outside the community center. You know, she said, most people think revenge stories end with someone losing everything. I smiled faintly. That's not how real ones end. No, she agreed. They end with someone finally living. That night, back at the lake house, I pulled Grandma Ruth's wooden box from the shelf one last time. I spread its contents across the table. Letters, photos, the will. Her careful handwriting looping through my life like a steady hand on my shoulder. I added one more thing. A photo from earlier that day. Me on the dock, hair pulled back, laughing at something unseen. No performance, no proof required. I closed the box gently. I did it, I whispered into the quiet room. Not to the house, not to the past, to myself. As summer deepened, the lake became a place of gathering again. Friends brought food without asking what they should contribute. Laughter echoed off the water at night. No one needed to earn their seat at the table. One evening, as the sky turned lavender and the first stars appeared, I stood alone at the edge of the dock and thought about the text that had started everything. Do not come to Christmas dinner this year. They thought exclusion would keep me small. Instead, it pushed me into a life wide enough to breathe in. I didn't rebuild relationships that required me to shrink. I didn't chase apologies that arrived too late. I didn't explain myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. I chose something else, dignity, and that choice changed everything. If you're listening to this story and something in it feels uncomfortably familiar, let me say this clearly. Being the strong one does not mean being the silent one. Loyalty does not require self-erasure. And telling the truth is not betrayal. Sometimes the bravest revenge isn't exposing them. It's refusing to carry what was never yours. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been the one excluded, overlooked, or quietly used in the name of family, you're not alone. Share this story, leave a comment, subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Someone out there needs to hear what you already know deep down. You were never too much. You were just in the wrong room. And the moment you walk out, your real life begins.